I'm going to start this with something most men won't admit out loud. Most men don't actually fear intimacy itself. They fear that specific moment when they express interest and the woman pulls back, turns cold, or says something that instantly kills the entire vibe between them. But what if the entire framework you've been operating from is backwards? What if there's a way to create the conditions where intimacy happens naturally, without sounding desperate, without applying pressure, and without facing that hard rejection that most men dread? A way that uses understanding of female psychology, not manipulation or force, but genuine comprehension of how women emotionally decide when they're ready and who they want to be ready with. And that's exactly what you're about to learn. Where are you watching from, by the way? Drop your city or country below because I'm Isabella and I'm genuinely curious where you all are tuning in from today. Now, before we go deeper into this, let me give you something almost no one understands about female psychology and intimacy. Women don't reject intimacy as a concept. Women reject the emotional experience attached to it in that specific moment. If the emotional atmosphere feels wrong or pressured or unsafe, the answer is automatically no, regardless of how attracted she might be to you. But if the emotional experience feels right and natural and safe, the answer comes almost automatically without her having to consciously decide. And what you're about to learn creates that right feeling without force or manipulation. Here's the foundational understanding that most men completely miss about how women make decisions around intimacy. Every man who gets rejected for intimacy usually makes one of these core mistakes. He asks too directly, creating a transaction. He asks too soon before the emotional foundation is built. He asks with nervous or needy energy that she can feel instantly. Or he asks without having built any genuine emotional tension first. And here's what you need to understand at a deep level. Women don't decide intimacy logically the way men often do. They decide emotionally based on how the entire interaction feels in their body and nervous system. The moment she feels genuinely safe with you, understood by you, desired by you, but not pressured by you, and emotionally aligned with you, the door to intimacy opens naturally without you having to force it. So today, I'm going to give you 8 psychological principles for creating intimacy without ever sounding needy, without making her uncomfortable, and without risking that cold, hard rejection that kills most interactions. But before we get into the specific principles, let me explain something critical about female psychology that most men either don't know or don't take seriously enough. Women experience desire on a completely different timeline and through completely different mechanisms than men do. For most men, attraction is visual and immediate. You see someone attractive and your body responds instantly, within seconds. But for women, attraction is layered and contextual. It builds and accumulates over time through emotional experiences, through how safe she feels, through anticipation and tension, through the stories her mind creates about who you are. This is why a woman can meet a man and feel absolutely nothing initially, and then 3 weeks later find herself completely drawn to him in ways she can't fully explain. It's not that she was playing games or being dishonest. It's that her attraction genuinely needed time to develop through accumulated emotional experiences with him. Understanding this fundamental difference changes absolutely everything about how you approach intimacy with women. Because if you understand that her desire builds through emotional layering over time, then you stop rushing, you stop pushing, you stop trying to force outcomes, and you start creating the specific conditions where her desire naturally escalates on its own timeline. Principle 1. Never create a direct transaction. Let me say this clearly because this single principle alone can transform your results with women. You never ask a woman for intimacy directly, as if it's a transaction that requires her explicit approval. Women fundamentally don't respond well to direct proposals around intimacy because direct questions create conscious decision points, and conscious decision points create pressure. Pressure automatically creates resistance in her nervous system, and resistance turns into rejection almost every time. But when you create an emotional invitation rather than a direct asking, when you shift the frame from transaction to natural flow, you completely change the dynamic. She doesn't feel like you're forcing anything or demanding a decision. It feels natural and organic, like something that's just happening between two people. And most importantly, she feels like she's making the choice herself, rather than responding to your demand. And when a woman feels like the decision is genuinely hers, rather than a response to pressure, she rarely rejects it because she's following her own desire. Think about the last time someone tried to sell you something with high-pressure tactics. The moment you felt that pressure, what happened in your body? You pulled back immediately, even if you were genuinely interested before. The exact same psychological principle applies to intimacy with women. When a man asks directly something like, "Do you want to come back to my place?" he's creating a conscious transaction where she has to weigh the decision analytically. And the analytical conscious mind is exactly where doubt and resistance live. But when you create what I call an emotional invitation rather than a direct question, you're speaking to her subconscious and her emotional system. You're creating a feeling rather than posing a question that demands an answer. And feelings don't get rejected the same way direct questions do, because feelings aren't experienced as pressure. Principle 2. Activate the 3 emotional switches. Here's the psychology behind creating conditions for intimacy, rather than asking for permission. You need to create an environment where she feels 3 specific things simultaneously: safety, trust, and anticipation. Women say yes to intimacy when all 3 of these emotional switches are turned on in her nervous system. If even one of these switches isn't active, she instinctively holds back and guards herself. But here's the powerful part. You don't need to beg for these feelings or hope they magically appear. You actively create them through how you show up. Safety doesn't mean she needs to have known you for months. Safety means she feels like you're not going to judge her for being sexual or physical, that you're not going to pressure her beyond what feels comfortable, and that you're not going to make her feel like she made a mistake regardless of what happens. Safety is created primarily through your emotional stability and groundedness. When you're calm and centered and not reactive to her responses, she feels safe in your presence. Trust builds when your words consistently match your actions over time. When you say you're not trying to rush anything, and then you actually demonstrate that through your behavior. When you respect her boundaries without making her feel bad or guilty for having them, trust is the foundation that allows vulnerability to emerge naturally. Anticipation is the chemical magic that makes intimacy feel electric and alive, rather than mechanical or transactional. Anticipation is created through restraint and suggestion, and the delicious tension in the space between what is and what could be. Most men focus entirely on creating attraction through being impressive or funny or confident, all good things in themselves, but they completely ignore these 3 emotional switches. They forget that a woman needs to feel safe and trusting and anticipating before any amount of attraction converts into actual intimacy. Attraction without these 3 switches just creates frustration on both sides. Principle 3. Use strategic withdrawal to remove pressure. This is one of the most counterintuitive but effective psychological methods you can use. Instead of constantly leaning in toward intimacy physically or emotionally, you occasionally lean back and create space. Not in a cold or rejecting way, not as punishment or gameplay, but in a way that demonstrates you're genuinely comfortable with connection developing naturally without forcing it. This does 2 critical things simultaneously. First, it removes all pressure from her nervous system instantly. And second, it creates emotional space where she often starts leaning in towards you on her own initiative. Women feel safe with a man who doesn't rush intimacy, not because he doesn't want it, which would just be disinterest, but because he respects natural energy and timing. When she feels you're not desperately trying to extract something from her, she starts moving toward you based on her own genuine desire. And that's exactly when rejection disappears entirely, because now intimacy is her idea, not something you're imposing on her. Let me give you a concrete, real-world example of how this looks in actual interactions. You're sitting close to a woman. There's obvious chemistry between you. The conversation is flowing naturally, and there's clear mutual interest. Most men at this exact point would escalate physically by moving closer, touching more frequently, or trying to kiss her. But what typically happens? She often pulls back slightly, not because she's not interested in you, but because the escalation felt like pressure that triggered her defenses. Now imagine this alternative scenario instead. You're in that same moment of connection and chemistry, and instead of leaning in harder, you actually lean back slightly in your chair. You pause the intensity for a moment. You look away casually. You create just a small amount of physical and emotional space. What happens in her mind and body? Suddenly, all the pressure evaporates completely. And in that absence of pressure, she becomes consciously aware of her own desire that was building. She thinks, wait, why did he pull back slightly? Does he not want this anymore? And without even consciously realizing what she's doing, she starts leaning in herself. She initiates the next touch. She closes the physical distance. She escalates the intimacy. This is strategic withdrawal in action. And it's extraordinarily effective because you're not rejecting her or playing manipulative games. You're simply demonstrating through your behavior that you're completely comfortable with natural flow. And that comfort makes her feel safe enough to pursue what she actually wants. Principle 4. Plant thoughts rather than making requests. This principle is subtle and psychological, and extremely effective when done properly. You don't ask for intimacy directly. You simply give her thoughts and observations that naturally lead her mind toward the idea of intimacy without any pressure. You do this through soft, emotionally suggestive statements like, I really like the way our energy feels when we're together. Or, you're surprisingly easy to be close to in a way I wasn't expecting. Or, you have this calmness about you that makes everything feel really natural. Notice that none of these statements ask for anything. None of them push or pressure, but all of them plant a seed in her mind about connection and closeness. Women respond to feelings, not to instructions or demands. When she feels something positive around you, intimacy becomes her curiosity and her desire rather than your request. And that difference in framing is absolutely everything. Here's what's happening psychologically. When you use these kinds of statements, you're helping her become consciously aware of feelings she's already experiencing, but hasn't put into words yet in her own mind. When you articulate her own feelings back to her accurately, she thinks, yes, exactly. That's what I'm feeling too. He gets it. This creates psychological alignment between you, and alignment is magnetic and compelling. There's also a principle in psychology called priming, where introducing certain words or concepts into a conversation makes them more mentally accessible and active in the other person's mind. So when you casually mention words like energy, closeness, connection, natural, comfortable, these words start subtly coloring and influencing how she interprets the entire moment you're sharing. She's not being manipulated here. She's being gently guided toward conscious awareness of what's already genuinely present between you. And that awareness is what transforms a pleasant conversation into the possibility of intimate connection. Principle 5. Hold masculine calm to activate her feminine. For women, intimacy is deeply tied to emotions, specifically to what we might call feminine emotions like softness, trust, warmth, vulnerability, and openness. A woman cannot enter that feminine emotional space if you, as the man, stay nervous or tense or overly sexual or aggressive in your energy. Your job in creating conditions for intimacy is actually quite simple. You hold what I call masculine calm. Not forceful energy, not overt sexuality, not neediness, just calm, grounded presence. When a woman feels this quality of calmness in a man's presence, something almost magical happens in her nervous system. Her guard naturally drops without her deciding to drop it. Her body relaxes. Her mind stops analyzing and protecting. And when her guard drops organically like this, saying yes to intimacy becomes completely natural. Not pressured, not forced, just the natural next step in the flow between you. Let me explain what masculine calm actually looks like in practice, because this concept gets badly misunderstood by most men. Masculine calm isn't stoic silence or being emotionless or appearing detached and unavailable. Masculine calm is the specific energy of a man who is fully present in his body, comfortable in the moment exactly as it is, and genuinely not anxious about outcomes or what happens next. It's the difference between a man who's constantly checking for approval and validation, asking, "Is this okay? Do you like this?" and a man who's simply being present and allowing the moment to unfold naturally at its own pace. Women are incredibly sensitive to reading energy, and they can instantly feel when a man is nervous, when he's trying too hard, when he's desperate for validation or approval. And all of those anxious energies push her into her masculine protective mode, into thinking and analyzing and guarding herself. But when you maintain genuine calm, when you're grounded and unhurried in your presence, she softens naturally. She relaxes into her body. She enters her feminine energy, which is exactly where desire and openness live. This is also the real reason women are attracted to men who seem experienced. Not because experience itself is inherently sexy, but because experienced men tend to be calm and grounded, because they're not frantically trying to figure out what to do next. They're just flowing with what's happening. Principle 6. Ask about feelings, not decisions. Now, let's talk about the specific moment that most men completely screw up, which is when they're about to suggest moving things forward. Here's the psychology that saves you from rejection. Never ask for a binary yes or no decision, because if you ask for a yes, you risk getting a no. Instead, ask about her feelings, which invites vulnerability and connection rather than creating pressure. Instead of saying, "Do you want to come back to my place?" which forces a decision, you say something like, "Does this feel like it's moving too fast for you?" Or, "Do you feel comfortable here with me right now?" See the fundamental difference in framing? Instead of pressuring her to make a decision about you, you're giving her emotional control and agency by asking her to check in with her own feelings. And when you offer that kind of control and respect, she feels significantly safer. And when she feels safer, she's far more likely to choose intimacy herself based on genuine desire. This technique works powerfully because it completely reframes the entire dynamic of the interaction. You're not asking her to accept or reject you as a person. You're simply asking her to honestly check in with her own internal emotional state. And that's a much easier and less threatening for her to answer truthfully. When you ask, "Do you want to come back to my place?" she has to consider a dozen things simultaneously. But when you ask, "Does this feel too fast for you?" she only has to consider one simple thing. How do I actually feel in this moment right now? And here's the beautiful part of this reframe. If she says, "Yeah, a little bit," or "I'm not sure yet," you haven't been rejected at all. You've simply been given valuable information about where she is emotionally. You can respond with complete authenticity, like, "That's totally fine, and I appreciate you being honest. I'm not trying to rush anything here. I'm really enjoying just being present with you." Now, she feels genuinely heard and respected and safe. And very often, within minutes, she'll be the one initiating escalation because you've removed all pressure and given her space to access her own desire. Principle 7. Mirror her desire back to her. Here's what almost no man truly understands about female psychology and intimacy. A woman doesn't decide whether to be intimate based primarily on how much you want her. She decides based on how much she feels you want her while simultaneously maintaining your composure and groundedness. This is a critical distinction. Too much overt desire from you equals pressure in her nervous system. Too little desire equals disinterest and she feels unwanted. But balanced, calibrated desire equals attraction and magnetic pull. So when she leans closer to you physically, touches you casually, laughs more freely, holds eye contact longer, or gets noticeably softer in your presence, you simply mirror that energy back to her. Not more intensity than she's showing, not less, but matching. This sends one powerful subconscious message. We're on the same wavelength energetically. We're in sync. This feels mutual and safe. This energetic alignment is one of the strongest psychological signals for intimacy escalating naturally. Mirroring is a deeply hardwired social and bonding mechanism in human psychology. From infancy, humans learn connection and safety through mirroring responses. When a baby smiles and the parent smiles back, the baby's nervous system learns, I am seen, I am understood, I am safe here, I am. That exact same neurological mechanism remains active in adult intimacy and connection. When a woman shows you vulnerability or desire and you mirror it back accurately, not overwhelming her signal and not ignoring it, but matching it, she feels understood and safe at a primal, unconscious level. This is also precisely where most men fail in interactions. They either under-respond, making the woman feel foolish or rejected for showing interest, or they dramatically over-respond, making her feel like she opened a floodgate she can't control anymore. The key is calibration and attunement. If she touches your arm lightly, you touch hers with similar pressure. If she holds eye contact for 3 seconds, you hold it for 3 seconds. If she laughs and leans in slightly, you laugh and lean in with matching energy. This creates what feels like a natural dance between two people. And in that dance, intimacy escalates organically without anyone having to explicitly ask for it or force it. Principle 8, make it the moment's idea, not your agenda. Now, let's talk about the final principle, which is how you close the gap toward intimacy without ever sounding desperate or needy. Women are deeply drawn to moments rather than agendas. Moments are emotional and spontaneous. Moments feel real and authentic. Moments feel natural rather than calculated or forced. So instead of asking for intimacy as if it's your agenda or goal, you simply acknowledge the moment you're sharing right now. You might say something like, "This feels really nice being here with you. It's kind of surprising how comfortable this feels." Or, "You have a really gentle energy right now that I'm drawn to." When you highlight and name the moment itself, you're not asking for intimacy or making a request. You're letting the moment itself create the invitation naturally. Women follow emotion, not logic, and emotion lives entirely in present moments. This removes pressure, removes awkwardness, and removes the possibility of hard rejection entirely. Here's why this final principle is so psychologically powerful. You're removing yourself as the primary agent who wants something. You're not positioning yourself as the person who wants intimacy. The moment itself is creating the desire and pull. This is a subtle but absolutely crucial psychological shift in framing. When you say, "Do you want to do this?" you're clearly the one wanting, and she has to decide about your want. But when you say, "This feels really nice," the feeling itself becomes the focal point of attention, and women are infinitely more comfortable following feelings than following explicit requests, because feelings feel authentic and organic, while requests feel transactional and goal-oriented. By naming and acknowledging the moment, you're also creating a shared experience between you. It's not you wanting her anymore. It's both of you experiencing something together in real time. And that shared experience is the genuine foundation of intimate connection that feels mutual rather than one-sided. Now let me bring all 8 principles together because they work as a complete system. You never create direct transactions. You activate the 3 emotional switches of safety, trust, and anticipation. You use strategic withdrawal to remove pressure. You plan thoughts rather than make demands. You hold masculine calm to activate her feminine. You ask about feelings, not decisions. You mirror her desire accurately, and you make intimacy the moment's idea rather than your agenda. When you understand and apply these principles together, you're not manipulating anyone. You're creating the optimal conditions where genuine desire can emerge and intimacy can happen naturally without force or pressure or rejection. This is about understanding psychology and working with human nature rather than against it. If you made it all the way to the end, drop a comment that says, "I watched till the end because I genuinely read all the comments and want to see who's actually committed to understanding this material deeply." And if you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button because I'm consistently putting out psychology and relationship content that goes way deeper than surface level dating advice. And just so you know, I gave you 8 principles today instead of the usual 7 that most content covers, because that 8th principle about making it the moment's idea rather than your agenda is what most men completely miss. And it's often the final piece that brings everything else together into something that actually works in real life. All right, go apply this with genuine respect and integrity. I'll see you in the next.